March 16, 1984, a man named Jeffrey Doucette was being led by police through an airport. The time was around 9:30 p.m. They escorted Doucette past a man wearing a hat and sunglasses. He was standing near some payphones. That's when this man turned and shot Doucette point blank in the head. The man in disguise was Gary Plosh. Jeffrey Doucette had kidnapped and abused his son, so Gary sought him out and murdered him, stating, "If somebody did it to your kid, you would do it too." And he is goddamn right. Whenever I think of Marvel's The Punisher, Gary Plosh comes to mind. Are some people so evil that they deserve to die? And if so, who among us has the right to make that call? The Punisher says yes, and me. Are his actions justified? It's a complicated question to answer, and it's the main question that the Punisher stories, whether they be in comics or on screen, pose to the readers and watchers. The idea for this video came to mind after I started playing the game Marvel Rivals. The game is so fun, but I suck at it, so clearly I started playing the Punisher. He's definitely one of the easier characters to use in that game, and I found some success playing as him.
Holy shit!
I started blasting. Bang, bang, bang. Try to shoot him in the back. You guys all think I'm a hero, and I'll accept that responsibility.
A tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god.
3, 2, 1.
After playing this game, I started reading a ton of comics. I didn't know much about the Punisher outside the Netflix TV show, so I decided it'd be fun to do a deep dive on the character. I wanted to find out more about his origins in the comics, cover some of the more divisive issues surrounding the character and his logo, and take a look at some of the adaptations, like the 3 movies and the Xbox game.
One order of Russian kebab to go.
But first, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing I had in common with Frank Castle, it's that we probably didn't have the best sleep. That was until I got a Helix mattress. Helix is one of my favorite sponsors because they help me sleep at night. I've been using a Helix mattress for years and years now. They've been a reoccurring and faithful sponsor for this channel for a long time. If you want an amazing bed, get yourself a Helix mattress. I don't even remember what I was sleeping on years ago, but whatever it was awful. Helix came out of nowhere and they were like, "Hey, you want a new bed?" And I was like, "Yes." So they had me take their online sleep quiz. After taking it, I found out that the mattress that matched with me was the Helix Moonlight Luxe. The mattress was shipped straight to my door. It was all rolled up and incredibly easy to set up. And boom, bada bing, I was sleeping amazing. You can do the same thing. Just go to helixsleep.com/ElvisTheAlien or click the link at the top of the description and fill out their sleep quiz to find a premium mattress and bedding that are customized to fit your needs. The Helix lineup offers a selection of 20 unique mattresses, and they also just launched a variety of mattress toppers as well. The best part is that Helix offers a 100-night sleep trial, so you can test the mattress and see if you like it first. They do this to ensure that you love it. In a Wesper sleep study, their team measured participants' sleep performance after switching from their old mattress to a Helix mattress. 82% of participants saw an increase in their deep sleep cycle. Helix mattresses are amazing. Level up your sleep game today by going to helixsleep.com/ElvisTheAlien. Up until May 31st, Helix has a Memorial Day exclusive partner offer where you can get 27% off site-wide, plus a free bedding bundle with any Luxe or Elite mattress order. So there's never been a better time to get yourself a new mattress. Thank you again to Helix for sponsoring this video. Now back to the review. To fully understand the Punisher, we must first understand what it means to love deeply. That might sound pretty weird because when you think of the Punisher, you usually think of this killing machine, right? But he only became the way he is because of this unexpected loss of his family that he loved more than anything. It's only in the unexpected loss of a deep love that someone will truly understand why the Punisher has connected with so many people over the years, especially if someone else was responsible for the loss of that loved one. With nearly 2,000 comic book appearances, the Punisher is a household name in the world of comics and beyond. His real name is Francis Castiglione, but everyone just calls him Frank Castle. He's a Vietnam veteran anti-hero vigilante who normally sports a large white skull on his chest, and he uses the skull to keep himself alive with the logic that his enemies will instinctively shoot the skull first rather than his face that's unprotected.
It's like Batman's bat signal thing on his chest. It draws an opponent's eye and gun sight away from his head, because if he gets shot in the chest, of course, he's got Kevlar under there.
His earliest suits show him wearing white gloves and white boots, and he does this on purpose. That way when you're fighting him, you can't tell when he's bleeding, but when he has blood on his hands and gloves, it would indicate that his enemies are bleeding and not him, which kind of makes him more intimidating, I guess.
I should have worn my white pants.
Of course, he's not wearing these in later iterations, probably because the artist thought he would look cooler if he was just wearing complete black except for the skull. Frank Castle is a man who tragically lost his family to crime when he ran into the wrong people at the wrong time. He was in Central Park with his family, and randomly the mafia was killing some man there by hanging him, and the Castle family ran into them and were subsequently gunned down. But Frank Castle lived, so he made it his life's mission to single-handedly wipe out every crime family off the face of the earth, and that extended to any criminal or otherwise that he deemed worthy of death. He's the judge, jury, and executioner, baby! Interestingly enough, he describes in the Year One story that what he does isn't revenge, it's
Punishment.
and he believes that revenge isn't a valid motive for what he does. He believes completely that what he's doing is right. The Punisher is a character that most people like, but nobody wants to admit that they like because they don't want to be lumped in with those people that maybe like him a little bit too much. But this is kind of bound to happen with any sort of edgy character in a popular franchise.
I'm the Joker, baby!
If 10 million people like something, then odds are there's a lot of bad eggs in that 10 million. And if that thing is someone like Frank Castle, I mean, the Punisher is unlike most comic book superheroes in that he's a lot more grounded and realistic. I think it's a lot easier for people of all ages to relate to his ideologies and put themselves in his shoes. Like, obviously people can't swing from webs or turn into a massive green giant monster, but it's a lot easier to imagine yourself as the Punisher because he's just a dude with guns, right? That's one of the reasons I think Batman is so popular too. And it's cathartic pretending to hurt those that have hurt you or your loved ones. And in a world where most heroes preach forgiveness and peace, heroes like Batman and anti-heroes like the Punisher are the exact opposite. For them, varying degrees of violence is the only answer.
He said, despite what your mama told you, violence does solve problems.
It must be said that the Punisher can be problematic because he appeals to people's deep hatred for other people. If you lack a certain self-awareness, then it's very easy to put yourself into this self-righteous position and convince yourself that you're exactly like the Punisher, and then all you have to do is go out and kill these people that have wronged you. And it's okay because this guy in this random comic book did it.
It's a fucking graphic novel, man.
It sucks, but a lot of emotionally immature people read comic books, and they might not be able to understand the subtext in some of the Punisher stories.
Killing le not good.
I didn't see him as a hero, at the time. I saw him as an anti-hero.
Frank Castle is a deeply flawed character, but some dumb people out there fail to realize that, and they idolize him without thinking. I don't think that's the writer's fault, and I think trashing the character altogether because of these things would just be cowardly, and I even think getting rid of Frank Castle and changing the logo isn't doing much in the first place. Deep down, the Punisher represents people's distrust and dissatisfaction in the system, and its ineffectiveness at dealing with criminals. There's a commonality between the Punisher and the Joker, and it's not just that weird freaks idolize them, and that results in the characters having a bad reputation.
White male rage.
Do you ever actually leave the studio?
It's kind of similar to white supremacists loving Warhammer 40k. As fans of these properties, we mustn't allow these hate-filled freaks to hijack the things that we like. However, we are to an extent helpless to what meaning symbols take on over time. That being said, the character the Punisher can still be cool, whether you see the American flag version of his logo on F-150s or not. There are many versions of the Punisher logo, but one of them in particular has been co-opted by certain groups. Let me apologize for this ahead of time, but it's practically impossible to talk about the Punisher in depth without getting political. Let's talk about how the Punisher's logo has been co-opted by the police, military, and far-right extremist groups like the Proud Boys. The skull can be often seen on the back of large pickup trucks, on belt buckles, on clothing, and I'm not trying to say that every person with a thin blue line or American flag Punisher logo patch on their gear is a hateful fascist or something. In fact, most of these guys probably just think the skull looks cool. It's a cool logo. If it wasn't cool looking, then these groups of people probably wouldn't have stolen it to represent whatever their point of view is. But some people might believe that this skull represents their hateful views in some way. I don't think there's anything wrong with owning guns and combat gear and pretending that you're a badass. It's kind of similar to playing D&D. Some of these guys might be deluded into thinking that they're him or that guy, simply because they own guns and a bulletproof vest and black clothing, when they're most certainly not that guy.
Not that guy.
I bet most of the guys that wear these Punisher logos haven't read a single Punisher comic before, and at most they might have seen the Netflix show. and have connected with the protagonist on a very superficial level, without any critical thinking.
Cool guy has gun and wear black. I also has gun and wear black. We is the same.
The Punisher logo has been seen everywhere in numerous movies that depict the military, like 13 Hours, The Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, to Punisher skull face paint in Range 15, to its many appearances in American Sniper.
Well, reading a comic book?
It can also be seen often in the real world, whether it be on police and military uniforms, or on the hoods of Eastern Kentucky police patrol cars. A Kentucky.com article reads as follows. The designs were spearheaded by Police Chief Cameron Logan, who worked with a vinyl decal shop in Louisiana to get the decals printed. Logan installed the decals on all the police vehicles in December. He would not discuss how much the decals cost. He would go on to say, that design is basically to give back to the police officers. Our lives matter just as much as anybody's. I'm not trying to stir anything up like that. I consider it to be a warrior logo. Just because it has Blue Lives Matter on the hood, all lives matter. That decal represents that we will take any means necessary to keep our community safe. Sure, dude. Whatever you want it to mean, I guess. That's what it means. Jerry Conway, one of the Punisher creators, had this to say about the co-opting of the logo. When cops put Punisher skulls on their cars, or members of the military wear Punisher skull patches, they're basically siding with an enemy of the system.
Well, in 06, we started putting the Punisher spray painted on our body armor and our helmets, and it was just to show, hey, we're the guys, we're here, don't mess with us.
Whether you think the Punisher is justified or not, whether you admire his code of ethics, he is an outlaw. He is a criminal. Police should not be embracing a criminal as their symbol. Marvel Comics reacted to the co-opting of the logo in Punisher number 13, which was written by Matthew Rosenberg. In this story, Frank Castle is cornered by some police officers who start gushing over their idol after they realize who he is. They then ask him for a selfie that they say they want to share on their Punisher fan page. They have a Punisher logo sticker on their car, which Frank Castle ends up ripping into pieces, and he has this to say to them. I'll only say this once. We're not the same. You took an oath to uphold the law. You help people. I gave that up a long time ago. You don't do what I do. Nobody does. You boys need a role model? His name is Captain America, and he'd be happy to have you. He then warns them to stop their worshiping of him, or he'll come for them next, because Frank knows deep down that he's a monster. So seeing boys in blue worship him disgusts him to his core. These are meant to be the good guys, and ever since he became the Punisher, Frank has never considered himself a good guy.
You're a bunch of clowns, you know that? Think you know my pain? Think you know my loss? I won't fucking piss on you if you were on fire, you got that?
In response to an investigation that was carried out against some police officers who used the thin blue line Punisher logo, the St. Louis Police Department's police union posted this on Facebook. As most of you are aware, some of our fellow officers are under IAD investigation and have been placed on the circuit attorney's exclusive list for merely posting a pro-police image of blue line Punisher symbol. This is wrong. The officers involved have long-standing records of exemplary service to the community, and their reputation has been damaged for merely their choice of pro-police symbol on Facebook. The department made a political decision to open an investigation after a complaint that the symbol was offensive and depicted vigilantism. The fact is, there will always be someone who will find fault with any symbol we identify with, or person we choose to carry our message. The blue line symbol and the blue line Punisher symbol have been widely embraced by the law enforcement community as a symbol of the war against those who hate law enforcement. The war against people who hate law enforcement? Ignore those people and do your fucking job. Like, what the hell? It's how we show the world that we hold the line between good and evil. All right, calm down, Aragorn. Jesus Christ. The simple fact is, using the Punisher logo on your cars or uniform is incredibly unprofessional. Hilariously, the logo was even seen on the jacket of Fox News' Sean Hannity. And Punisher co-creator Jerry Conway has gone on to say, Frank Castle would beat Sean Hannity into a pulp. Castle always represented a code of honor that respects the ultimate values of American society. He's not a conspiracy nut. Even in his most fringe existence in the 90s and early 2000s, he had legitimate enemies. A poser like Hannity would have infuriated him.
The great Sean Hannity from New York. Hey, Sean. Good to see you, Tucker. Great show as always.
And perhaps most troublingly, it was seen on the vest of one of the men who infiltrated the Capitol on January 6th. John Bernthal, the actor who plays the Punisher in the Netflix TV show, had tweeted this in response to a fan who was outraged at the usage of the skull logo. These people are misguided, lost, and afraid. They have nothing to do with what Frank stands for or is about. Big love, Jay. Aww. Punisher co-creator Jerry Conway has been vocal in his outrage over the use of the skull. He told Sci-Fi in 2019 that, as far as neo-Nazis go, they're despicable human beings, and Frank Castle would have all of them in his crosshairs. He said this just a few months after the riots in Charlottesville. He then said, "The fact that white nationalists and Nazis embrace it is a tragic misunderstanding. It's a misappropriation of the character and a blatant disregarding of reality. They literally do not know what they are fucking talking about." On the opposite end of the spectrum, after the tragic death of George Floyd, Skulls for Justice was created. It was a fundraising collaboration between Jerry Conway and a group of POC and white artists. It featured t-shirts with the Punisher logo on them, combined with Black Lives Matter elements and slogans. Conway said this about the fundraiser: "For too long, symbols associated with the character I co-created have been co-opted by forces of oppression and to intimidate Black Americans. This character and symbol was never intended as a symbol of oppression. This is a symbol of a systemic failure of equal justice. It's time to claim this symbol for the cause of equal justice and Black Lives Matter." All of this to say, I think most people that wear the logo aren't doing it for nefarious reasons and probably believe it represents something positive about themselves or their ideology. But let's be honest, most of these guys just think it's cool and they want to be perceived as a badass by their peers, and the Punisher is badass. It's really as simple as that. Guns and the Punisher is like the Shield with Captain America, so it makes a lot of sense to me that the gun-loving group of Americans would connect with this character and love him. For some of these people, I think the Punisher logo represents the ferocity of the American spirit to preserve the good and vanquish evil at all costs without mercy.
No, we're not proud.
We're proud Americans.
We're proud Americans.
We ain't playing fucking nice no goddamn more.
The logo has changed somewhat in recent years. It has tusks now and horns. I prefer the more simplistic version, but I kind of understand why they changed it. It's different, but it still has the original's essence. So what powers does the Punisher have? Well, none. He's just a guy with a lot of combat training. I guess you could say his powers are an iron will, and he has nothing to lose. He also has the ability to take quite a beating, and very often as well. This guy gets his ass kicked non-stop. If you go 3 pages in a Punisher comic without him getting punched, stabbed, or shot, then you're probably not reading a Punisher comic. The Punisher was inspired by the book series The Executioner, which is fitting, you know, given the names are kind of similar, and given that the Punisher's ult in Marvel Rivals is literally Judge, Jury, Executioner.
Judge, Jury, Executioner!
Jerry Conway imagined the character as a villain for The Amazing Spider-Man. Stan Lee came up with the name, and Amazing Spider-Man penciler Ross Andrew was the first to draw the character. The Punisher made his debut in The Amazing Spider-Man number 129, released in February 1974. Since then, he exploded in popularity, and has been in many comics over the years. There are 3 Punisher movies, and 2 seasons of a TV show. He also features in the Daredevil show.
What kind of name is the Devil of Hell's Kitchen anyway?
Like any other popular fictional character, they capitalized the fuck out of this guy. Through shirts, mugs, action figures, you name it, if something exists, there's a Punisher version of that thing. The character is tied very closely to Daredevil in the comics. Their differing views on justice and the fact that they operate in the same location makes them a fun duo to pit against one another. The Punisher refers to Daredevil as the Red Clown in the comics, while Daredevil tries and fails to change Castle's point of view in a futile effort to make him put aside his kill-on-sight war against crime. But you can't knock a man for trying. So yeah, here he is, the Punisher. A very cool anti-hero with a very cool name. He's super edgy, he kills on sight, he takes no prisoners, he's ruthless. He's like the symbol of ultimate masculinity. So you can see why a lot of men who, you know, have issues with their masculinity might look up to this guy. And Frank Castle is just as human as you and I. This welcomes disillusioned people to personify or imagine themselves as him. All they need is the skull shirt and a gun, and you can imagine yourself as Frank. You have to kind of admit though, if the Punisher actually existed, he would be the ultimate crime deterrent. Imagine there's 2 universes, right? In one of them, you live in a city with Batman, and in the other, you live in a city with the Punisher. Well, in both cases, if you were a criminal, you would probably just, you know, leave the city. That'd be the most obvious solution. In fact, I don't know why most criminals don't just up and leave if these guys are so effective at stopping your crimes. If you were forced to live in this city for some reason, like imagine there's a massive moat around it with crocodiles and shit, I don't know. I would probably rather live in the city with Batman. Because yeah, I might get the shit beaten out of me and I might end up in jail, but I think I would prefer that than running into a random guy with a skull on his shirt, wielding an M60 and turning me into a human flesh puddle. I think the city with the Punisher would have zero crime within a year. Like zero. I'm talking no crime whatsoever. People would second guess stealing purses off of old ladies if this guy existed. Like holy shit. Like who knows, he might be perched on a rooftop somewhere and might blow a hole straight through my face if I take this woman's purse. Like hell no, I'm not risking it. Many people probably have a complicated relationship with the character, depending on the circumstances of their lives. Someone's relationship to the Punisher is probably determined by their upbringing and your life experiences in general. If you're a veteran or a police officer or you love guns, then you're probably more likely to love Frank Castle as a character than someone who isn't one of those things. Like if you're a cop and your job is to stop crime, then Frank Castle's vigilantism might seem like a wonderful fantasy to you. Just imagine how much simpler it'd be just to go around murdering all the evil people. Instead of going through all that boring judicial stuff, you know? But of course, that's a fantasy. Why does Frank Castle get to choose who lives and who dies? What is it about him that makes him worthy to make that call? Aren't there countless other people that have gone through tragedies that are similar to his? But they don't go around murdering people that they deem evil enough to kill. Isn't Frank just as bad as the people he's murdering, if not much worse? You could easily argue that the amount of suffering that Frank Castle spreads is not equaled out by the crimes that he's stopping. In fact, he's just making the world a worse place, a place full of fear, where if you step out of line just a little bit, who knows, this crazy guy might come out of nowhere and put a bullet in you. A world with the Punisher is a world where nuance isn't allowed. He never once thinks about the children of the people that he's murdering. He never thinks about the wives, the brothers, the sisters that might be very innocent, but still love and are related to the evil people that he's killing. And his actions might be directly linked to making the relatives to the people he murdered evil. It's an endless cycle. Pull the trigger! One that Frank Castle knowingly perpetuates. I get why people love the character though. If someone murdered my wife, I would definitely go insane and seek retribution in some way. Revenge is an easy thing to relate to, but at the same time, Frank Castle cares for the innocent. He deeply cares. He'll leave money behind when he takes clothes that don't belong to him in the War Journal comics. He'll constantly try his best to avoid hurting innocent people or people that he deems innocent. Frank Castle reminds me of two different characters combined, those being Batman and Dexter. He's similar to Batman in that he's a symbol that criminals fear. He also wears dark clothing and their demeanor is similar.
Excuse me.
They're both kind of edgy. Obviously, they differ in that Castle thinks killing is a necessity because he believes that people can't change, because he personally can't. And Bruce Wayne believes that killing would make things worse, and that doing so would make him worse than who he's fighting against. Frank Castle is also similar to Dexter in that they both secretly love killing and have a compulsion to do so. Dexter's Dark Passenger is very similar to Frank Castle's war against crime. They both justify their killings in a similar way. Also, all three characters had something awful happen to their families. The only difference being Castle was the only one of the three to be a parent who lost a wife and kids, while Bruce Wayne and Dexter were both very young when disaster struck. Funnily enough, Julie Benz, the actress that plays Dexter's wife, Rita Morgan, stars in the movie Punisher Warzone. In the movie, she plays the grieving widow to a man Frank Castle kills. Believe it or not, there are some Punisher video games. There was a Punisher NES and Game Boy game, but they're not much to write home about. I haven't played them myself, but what I've seen of them online didn't impress me very much. They've got this arcade style to them. There is one Punisher game that is pretty good, however. It was released for the Xbox and PS2 in 2005. I didn't play it back then. In fact, I didn't know any of these video games existed until I started research for this video. But yeah, across the internet, people seem to like this game, and it's pretty tough to find. I went to several local game shops in my area, and none of them carried it, so I had to resort to getting it off of eBay. After playing it, I think it's best described as a Max Payne style shoot 'em up. You can use a variety of different guns and melee weapons. You can interrogate or torture people in all sorts of unique ways, using a variety of different random objects. You'll put people up to a buzzsaw, you'll hang people off of ledges. They'll be called special interrogations or special kills.
I'd rather be dead.
You get more points by doing this. You can also get information, whether it be about an ambush nearby. Sometimes you'll get keys to lock doors. Some of them can be pretty creative. At one point, I got information out of someone by running them over with a forklift. You can dual wield almost every single gun in this game, which kind of harkens back to the good old GoldenEye days.
Yo!
There's an ultimate ability you can use. The screen gets all blurry. Frank Castle becomes incredibly fast. He pulls out 2 knives and you can throw knives at people, or you can rush up to them and execute them. The style points that you earn through every level will allow you to unlock different upgrades for Frank. Something that I found myself doing repeatedly was running up to someone, grabbing them, and using them as a body shield, which is incredibly easy to do, by the way, because the damage that one person will do to you is very minimal. You only really have to worry about crowds killing you, so as long as you constantly have a body shield, you're not dying in this game. And it kind of trivializes the experience. It is still fun though.
Be my guest. The Nucci's, Carlo. Why are they here? What's the connection?
There's a mission where you start out hiding in Bobby Nucci's casket, and during his funeral service, you pop out of this casket with a machine gun and start mowing down the crowd. It's fucking crazy. I gotta admit, it felt kind of gross playing this at some points. I wasn't convinced everyone I was killing throughout the game deserved it. It gave me the same kind of ick that The Last of Us 2 gave me. But in this game's case, it kind of makes sense because, you know, you're not supposed to idolize Frank Castle. He's kind of a psychopath. And that might be the point, right? If you didn't feel kind of weird playing this game, then would it really be a Punisher game? And I have to admit, kicking that old scrotum bitch Mon Nucci out a window was pretty satisfying. Also, this game has pretty great music.
I'm Mon Nucci's nephew, asshole. She's gonna kill you for this.
It gave me similar vibes to like the N64 game Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. I just want to say, it sucks that you can't play as a guy in a black trench coat carrying a gun without automatically thinking of a school shooter. And what's even crazier is that this game came out only 6 years after Columbine. And when that school shooting took place, there was this massive uproar about how video games caused violence because people knew that they played Doom. So I can't imagine what people thought when this game came out. I always play games on normal because I feel like that's like the intended difficulty for most gamers, and I found it to be extremely easy. I really didn't have to be tactical at all for most of my playthrough. That being said, the AI isn't terrible for a game of that time. They'll shoot at you from behind cover, they'll dodge and even flank you at times, and you'll meet recognizable heroes in the game as you play, like Black Widow and Daredevil, and you fight some of Punisher's more notable enemies, like the Russian, Bullseye, Kingpin, and of course Jigsaw. Obviously, you can also play as Frank Castle in, you know, the billion other Marvel games out there. In the first ever limited solo comic run for Punisher, he kills a bunch of gangsters who dress up like him in order to strike fear into their competition. It's kind of funny how the first solo Punisher comic ever released had him killing a bunch of people who were dressing up like him, because many years into the future, we would have all these groups co-opting the Punisher logo, and then Marvel reacts with a comic book speaking out against the people who are co-opting the logo. It's just weird how these things work out. So yeah, the Punisher is like a deadly Batman. The name The Punisher strikes fear in the hearts of criminals. In the 4-issue comic book limited series written by Garth Ennis titled Born, Frank Castle is fighting the war in Vietnam, and his unit is completely surrounded. Knowing he'll likely die, he embraces his dark passenger, or the dark side of him that loves to fight, that secretly wants the war to go on forever, because he can't imagine his life without the war. In order to survive this insane position that he's in, he completely embraces this dark side of himself, and he kills more than 100 men all by himself. He kind of like blacks out, and then he re-emerges into himself and everyone around him is dead. It's insane. This grisly scene is described in episode 8 of season 2 of Daredevil. The episode is named Guilty as Sin.
Lieutenant Frank Castle was part of a small team. The mission became compromised. They were cut off. The enemy had set up an ambush. All they had to do was wait. Knew that Frank's team had to come to them. Frank went to the LZ all by himself. So the men hear the firefight break out. All hell breaks loose. Frank against God knows how many. And then there was silence. Next sound they hear is the helos, the helicopters. They get to the landing zone, you know what they see? Frank Castle, standing there, grinning. 32 Moors surrounding him, all dead. Suddenly gun cleared that entire LZ all by himself.
How?
By being Frank Castle.
I swear to God, Kojima must have taken some inspiration from the Punisher comics when he created Metal Gear Solid Snake, because in the War Journal series, Frank Castle looks and acts exactly like Snake. Also, the comics do address how the Punisher's absurd killing streak has prevented some people from committing crimes out of fear, more specifically in the comic book story Black is White, and how the criminal underground's #1 mission is to find and kill Frank Castle, not only just so he'll no longer threaten their operations, but they also want to do it to claim a sort of trophy of prowess to other gangs and crime families. Like whichever crime family kills the Punisher would ultimately be like the top dog, right? My favorite Punisher comic book stories involve him either protecting children or killing people who cause children harm, because there's a personal connection there for Castle. There are 2 examples of this in Garth Ennis's Mother Russia. In the beginning of this story, he targets a lowlife who was just released from prison. He operates a child trafficking ring. After entering their home through a window, the Punisher swiftly ends this guy with a shotgun. Afterwards, he looks to the man's mother, who's rushing him with a knife. Frank Castle thinks to himself whether or not he should give this woman the benefit of the doubt and leave her unharmed. He isn't positive that she had a role to play in her son's nefarious operations. He then says, "Fuck it," and blows her face off anyway. If that doesn't perfectly exemplify like the problem with the Punisher's war, then I don't know what does. Later on in the Mother Russia story, he's on a mission to bring a child back alive, and he ends up getting his ass handed to him by a much smaller man who's a master at martial arts. Frank is lying on the floor helpless, and then the smaller man smacks the little girl to keep her quiet. While lying on the floor, Frank makes the connection between this girl and his own daughter that he failed to protect. And he's like, nah, not again. So he finds the will to stand up. The fire is within him. And you know as you're reading that there isn't a universe where Frank loses this fight. The guy he's facing is completely fucked. And Frank ends him similar to how the Hulk smashed the shit out of Loki in the MCU. There are 2 additional things that I loved about the Mother Russia story. The first is that throughout the story, Frank Castle didn't just want to protect the little girl from physical harm. He made her promise him never to play with guns, and he didn't want the men that he was working with saying curse words around her. He also made sure she didn't see the people he killed throughout the story. He didn't want any of the bad parts of the world rubbing off on her. Mother Russia is one of my favorite Punisher stories. Very often we see the gritty, brutal side of Frank, but we don't often see the compassionate side of him. He isn't so much a Punisher in this story as he is a protector, and it made the story a lot more powerful and compelling for me. I also really like the Garth Ennis story, The Slavers, where he gets involved in taking down sex traffickers. I have to be honest, it's cathartic as hell watching him brutally take down these monstrous and heinous people, even if it's fictional, because I'm sure we all want to live in a world where people who abuse children and women either pay the ultimate price or live in crippling fear. I read a bunch of Punisher comics as I was researching for this video. If I were to recommend any Punisher comic to you guys, it would be the Garth Ennis Punisher Max series. It's awesome. The stories are very well written, and the art by Robertson, LaRosa, Fernandez, and Braithwaite is so good. In this series, Frank Castle is older. It's kind of similar to the movie Logan. If you like that movie, then you will love these comics. I'm not a huge fan of the most recent versions of Frank Castle when he gets involved with the Hand. In the King of Killers comics, they force him to use swords and train with ninjas and use throwing stars and stuff like that. It feels weird. Katanas and Frank Castle is like giving Batman an AK-47, you know what I mean? All right, now let's talk about the Punisher movies. What depresses me most about these 3 movies I'm gonna be talking about is how lackluster the stories are, because there are so many good stories in the Punisher comics to choose from, but none of these movies really analyze the complexities of this character in any meaningful way. They do kind of scratch the surface here and there, and I don't hate these movies. They're fun action flicks. I just wish they did more. The first Punisher movie from 1989 was directed by Mark Goldblatt. He's directed only 2 movies before, this being his second, so a lot of this movie's technical flaws are a bit understandable. The first movie he ever directed was Dead Heat, and it was released a year earlier. This guy is mostly known for editing movies now. The Punisher is the last movie Goldblatt would ever make. He says that he did a lot of research on the Punisher, and Stan Lee gave him their business. And according to Goldblatt, when the movie was finished, Stan Lee thought the movie was too violent. If only he knew how viscerally violent Punisher comics would become in the future. By today's standards, 1989's The Punisher isn't all that violent, but back then standards were different, and I can see how people might have been turned off by it, but others might have found it compelling because it wasn't like all the other stuff that was out at the time. In this version of The Punisher, Frank Castle's family explodes in a car. We never learn the specifics of his family's demise though.
He relives the experience of them dying You know, his wife is trapped with the kids in a car that has a car bomb and he can't get her out. It was meant for him. All the guilt that he feels.
Dolph Lundgren was cast as Frank Castle, and I'm not a huge fan of his voice for the Punisher.
Why are the innocent dead and the guilty alive?
He does have that tough guy Giga Chad look to him. He's also super tall, which works for the character. Although I think young Dolph Lundgren suits someone like Mad Max better than the Punisher. Not once while I was watching did I feel like he fit the name Frank Castle. And his look isn't all that similar to the comic book version either. This Swedish man does not look Italian. You don't look at Dolph Lundgren and go, rigatoni, lasagna. His acting isn't the best either. It definitely could have been worse though. Do you know how I know? Because they originally asked if Steven Seagal wanted the part as Frank Castle. God damn it. Part of me wishes we got that movie because it probably would have been hilarious.
I want you to shut the fuck up.
But Seagal was tied up with other projects. Mark Goldblatt, the director, had said in an interview that Dolph Lundgren was a Punisher fan when they approached him with the role. But in a different interview with Dolph Lundgren, he says that when they approached him with the part, he had never heard of the character. So, I mean, one of them is lying. It's funny how Frank Castle in this movie feels a lot more like Mad Max, and that might have to do with the fact that they filmed this movie in Sydney, Australia. Yeah, their production designer, Norma, came up with his leather motorcycle suit, and she had done the costumes for the early Mad Max movies. So this is just a Mad Max movie disguised as a Punisher movie. Like, that's really what it is. Across the board, the acting isn't the best in this, and it can be corny at times.
How long do you think someone can live after you've cut out their heart?
A long time.
And the action scenes can be pretty funny. They have that old school Hollywood charm that I think is really fun. One scene shows Dolph Lundgren shoot a guy with a crossbow. He uses the rope that's tied to this crossbow bolt as a zip line. Like, it's just so stupid, but I love it. I love it. He shoots a bunch of these drug dealers as he's sliding down this zip line. Also, there's copious amounts of throwing knives in this movie. He uses a throwing knife with a skull on the pommel as his calling card. And he does throw knives in the comics, but he much prefers firearms. In this movie, Frank Castle hangs out in the sewers. He's like the Penguin, and he rides a motorcycle everywhere. I wish they gave him the dumbass motorcycle he used in the Warzone comics. It has like this skull on the front of it, and he even wears a helmet with a skull on it. So yeah, this movie is about a war between American crime families and the Yakuza, and Frank kind of gets caught between the two. One scene, he shoots the ever-living hell out of a criminal gambling den, except there was no one there. You know how much money he wasted in ammo during this scene? God damn!
It cost us nearly $2 million in the cash.
And the combat sound effects are a bit goofy at times, but I think that was kind of just part of cinema in general at the time. At one point, a Yakuza boss asks him who sent you, and he says,
Batman.
Wait a minute. Apparently Dolph Lundgren ad-libbed that line, and they just kept it in, even though it makes no sense. Whatever.
And there's a pause, and he looks at her and he says, Batman.
The cinematography isn't the best in this movie. The filmmaking in general is pretty choppy and amateurish, but the dialogue is amazing. I don't want to stretch things out, Frank Castle says, as someone's about to be turned into Stretch Armstrong on a rack in front of him.
I don't want to stretch this out. Have a nice day.
Strangely, in this movie, there's no mention of his military background, and he doesn't wear a skull on his chest. Very strange decision for a Punisher movie. That's like shooting a Batman movie, but, you know, not including the bats.
Yeah. I'm Man.
Just get rid of the bat symbol. Just have it be some guy in a black suit and a cape. Keep the cape.
Knock it!
While he doesn't have the white skull on his chest in the movie, a talented YouTuber shows us what the film would look like if Frank Castle did have his iconic skull. The director said that they decided not to use the skull because it reminded him of Adam West's Batman. He didn't want the movie to be too goofy, which is kind of understandable. Obviously, he shouldn't have put Frank Castle in spandex like he wore in the earliest comics, but Goldblatt does admit in an interview that it was probably a miscalculation and they should have given him the skull on his shirt. Goldblatt was inspired by John Woo's The Killer when making this movie, and you can kind of see the inspiration take hold here and there. At the end of this movie, it's basically a bunch of people fighting with their fists, especially during the martial art fights, and it worked out pretty well for them because Dolph Lundgren has a history winning karate championships. So yeah, not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's still a fun watch. Some of the painful flashbacks for Dolph Lundgren's character are pretty goofy. These are supposed to be very serious sequences, but they're definitely supposed to make the viewer sympathize with the Punisher, but they just made me laugh. Like Dolph Lundgren's like pained face, it's just funny. I I don't know how to say it, man. Like, just watch this. In 2004, we got the second Punisher movie. Just like the first one, it's titled The Punisher. The movie starts before Frank Castle's family is killed. He works as an undercover agent with the feds. Frank Castle is blamed for the death of the mafia boss Howard Saint's son, Bobby Saint. Due to them blaming Frank Castle for Bobby Saint's death, they put a hit out on his entire family. In the movie, the mafia doesn't just kill his wife and kids, they go to a family reunion of his, and they start killing everybody. And instead of being shot, his wife and child are run over by a car on a pier. Also, the classic Punisher logo is given to Frank before his family's demise by his child, who got him a shirt with the logo on it. His son explains to him that it's meant to like ward off bad spirits or some shit. It honestly would have been better if Frank just drew the logo himself. Frank arrives at the pier too late, and he finds his family dead. The mafia goons find him there, they shoot him in the chest, and then he's blown into the water by an explosion. And somehow he's saved, and he survives. Remember when Indiana Jones survived a nuclear blast in a fridge? It gave me the same vibe. After Frank is shot on the pier, he later returns to his father's house and retrieves his father's gun. Since it was a crime scene, the police would have removed all the weapons though, and they definitely wouldn't have left them for anyone to steal, so it's just kind of strange. Frank Castle kind of turns into Mad Max and creates this epic black bulletproof muscle car. There's a pretty fun scene of him torturing someone, but not really torturing them. He's kind of like fooling them into believing that they're being tortured. The person he's torturing is suspended in front of him, and he uses a blowtorch to cook some meat nearby. He tells them that they won't feel pain at first because the blowtorch is so hot it'll burn off their nerve endings, but they will smell flesh burning. It won't be until afterwards that it'll start to hurt. And in order to make them believe this, he burns steak nearby with the blowtorch. He waits a second and then presses a popsicle that he can't see on his back. And he starts to freak out thinking that he's burning the flesh off of his back. This part is pulled straight from the comics. It makes them believe they're being cooked alive when they aren't. This obviously ends up working, and he gets the information he needs to locate the crime family responsible. Later, Frank Castle uses a go-go gadget ejecto knife against someone when he's helpless on the ground after a car accident. And he uses a similar knife against the goons who torture Spacker Dave in the comics. Spacker Dave is one of his 3 neighbors that he lives with, and they're taken from the Garth Ennis Welcome Back Frank comic book story. One of them is this fat man, and the only thing that's special about him is that he's fat. Another is a lonely girl, and the third is this punk rock guy with a bunch of piercings on his face. When they initially introduced Mr. Bumpo in the comics, he's literally stuck in a doorway. And just like Iron Fist Alexander from Elden Ring, he asks Frank to help him get unstuck.
Oh, yes.
I wish the movie spent more time introducing these people to us and getting us to like them a little bit more, because we hardly know anything about them, aside from the fact that Joan has this abusive ex-boyfriend. So yeah, remember how I said earlier that Frank indirectly killed the son of a mob boss, and so the mob boss wants revenge on him? Well, it's actually Howard Saint's wife, Livia Saint, who orders the hit on Castle's entire family. This isn't too dissimilar from the villain Ma Nucci, who's the mob boss from the Welcome Back Frank comic book story. In the comic, he killed her sons and brother, and then seeks to kill her next. And in the comic book, he feeds her to fucking polar bears at one point. She ends up surviving, but without any limbs. She's literally a chicken nugget human. There's a fun scene in this movie where Frank gets his ass kicked by this giant Russian man who's dressed like a huge candy cane. It's an awesome scene. This man's name is literally just the Russian. Thomas Jane, while filming a fight sequence, actually and accidentally stabbed Kevin Nash, the Russian, with a blunted butterfly knife that a prop coordinator had failed to switch out with a harmless version of the prop. Nash continued filming the scene, never breaking character. The crew then made it up to him with some cold beer. In the comics, he looks very much the same, and he has the reputation as this like unkillable monster. He kicks the shit out of Frank at first, and Frank eventually defeats him by realizing he has an aversion to heat. So he throws a pizza at his face, and then flops Mr. Bumpo onto the guy's torso and head, which ends up suffocating him to death. Like, this Russian dude could probably lift like 3 elephants, but Mr. Bumpo,
I mean, he's pretty big.
What surprised me the most about this movie is that the best actor is Ben Foster. He's just this random druggie with a ton of piercings, but what they end up doing to this kid makes you feel so bad. Howard Saint in this movie, or Maynard from the comics, send goons to Castle's apartment once they realize where he lives. They don't find Frank Castle there because he's being hidden and cared for by Joan. Instead, they find Spacker Dave, and they end up torturing him. And the way they torture him is by ripping out every single piercing on his face. We don't get to see the aftermath of what he looks like in the comic. In the movie, we get to see his bloody face. Ben Foster makes you believe that this is actually happening to him. And Spacker Dave tells them nothing, despite the pain. He's loyal to a fault to this neighbor he hardly knows. And he tells Castle that he didn't tell them anything because he's family. I felt more emotion during this scene than I did watching any of the other Punisher movies. John Travolta in this movie doesn't even try. He ends up being killed by being burned alive, and his screams, if you can even call them that, are just pathetic. Like, this must have been the first and only take, I swear. I have to admit, the action at the end of this movie is fun. I like that he used the body armor with the skull painted on it, which is pretty similar to what Frank Castle does in the Year One comic story. Frank Castle creates this skull of fire with a bunch of car explosions, and it's so cheesy. Like, what, he planned this so people that are watching from a helicopter can be like, oh, look, a skull. Overall, The Punisher is a decent action movie with acting that varies wildly in quality and effectiveness. Thomas Jane is fine as Frank Castle, but as far as I'm concerned, he's nothing to write home about. This movie is like a perfect 5 out of 10 movie to me. It's very mid. In 2008, we got the movie Punisher Warzone. This movie surprised me in a lot of ways. With a budget of $35 million and a theatrical release gross of only $10.1 million, this movie didn't do very well, which is probably why we haven't seen another Punisher movie since then, especially with the 29% and 42% Rotten Tomato scores. This movie doesn't make a very great first impression. The introductory sequence is extremely over-stylized. It's very green. You can tell they were trying to transform stills from the movie to look like panels from a comic book, but it looks pretty bad in my opinion. This movie takes many different stories and characters from the comics and mashes them together. It was directed by Lexi Alexander, the same director that made the movie Green Street Hooligans that I have never seen. While this movie isn't perfect,
all right.
out of the 3 movies that I'm talking about today, this is definitely the most faithful version of Frank Castle. The lighting and color grading is definitely one of this movie's biggest weaknesses. At times, the shadows are way too dark, and it looks like the contrast is too high in some scenes and too low in others. It's all over the place, and the tone isn't consistent whatsoever. The first scene of the movie reminds me of this moment during the Garth Ennis Punisher Max run, where Frank Castle mows down countless members of the mob outside a similar looking mansion. I have to say this, and I know I'm probably repeating myself from earlier, I'm almost positive if we lived in a world where the Punisher existed, the mob just wouldn't. Either that or they would be traveling around trying to avoid him as much as possible. The money simply wouldn't be worth the risk. Think of it this way. Would you work for the mob in New York City if you knew that the probability of you being turned into Swiss cheese was 100%? I don't think you would. In the movie, Frank Castle appears out of nowhere. He stands on their table in the dining room with a flare in his hand after cutting the power. It does look pretty cool. Bro turned into Sam Fisher from Splinter Cell. And I do like that he has the skull on his chest. It's not much to ask for when you're, making a Punisher movie. But apparently it is, considering the first one. This opening action scene is equal parts silly and badass. Frank kills far too many of these people far too easily with knives. It's like he literally used the Berserk mode from the 2005 video game. He snaps 2 of their necks one after another like they're twigs, and then he hangs from the chandelier and shoots countless goons as he spins in a circle. It's like something you would expect to see out of The Matrix. He kicks a chair so hard into someone that the leg impales his head. Right away, this Frank Castle feels a lot more like the Punisher from the comics than in the 2 previous movies. Ray Stevenson looks a lot more like Frank Castle from the comics as well. I think the casting was spot on for this movie. It'd be tough to find someone equally as good for the role as Ray Stevenson. And by God, they fucking did it, didn't they? But we'll get there. This movie suffers from pretty awful music, and I love Rise Against as much as the next guy. But in my opinion, they don't make for a great movie soundtrack. I feel like when you put this sort of music in a movie like this, you know, butt rock, then it kind of cheapens the feel of it. McGinty and his goons are jumping from rooftop to rooftop with butt rock playing in the background when the Punisher shoots one of these guys with a grenade launcher, and he turns the guy into a mist. It's pretty hilarious. Like shooting a bird in Duck Hunt or something. McGinty is a much more prominent and lingering threat in the comics than in this movie. In the comics, he's a lot scarier, but he's basically a nobody in the movie. Guess how Castle defeats this guy in the movie? He shoots out both of his kneecaps, and he does this immediately upon seeing him. And then he throws him from atop a building and uses his body to safely get down. So there's that. The actor who played McGinty in the movie isn't a great actor either. In fact, he's pretty bad. The guy had both of his kneecaps blown out, and this is how he acts when the Punisher walks up to him.
But turns out, you don't have any anymore.
There are some familiar villains from the comics in this movie, and it's pretty cool to see them in this, like McGinty and Jigsaw. It is canon that Jigsaw looks the way he does because of the Punisher. His face is all messed up. Jigsaw's real name is Billy Russo, or Billy the Butte, and in this movie, the Punisher pushes him into this massive rotating bottle machine that slowly cuts him to ribbons. It looks like it sucks. Later in the movie, they reveal his new face, and the prosthetics and makeup department kind of killed it with his look. Although, when he announces his new nickname to his two buddies in a car, it's kind of cringe.
You call me Jigsaw.
Like, it'd be better if people just made up this nickname for him instead of him making it up because he thought it was badass or something. Also, Castle's family is killed while having a picnic, and it's only shown to us during these memory flashes. How exactly his family is killed by the Mafia isn't all that important, I don't think. They do it differently in the show. It's how they portray him after the fact that really matters, I think. It seems like his family is killed off in a different way in every new version of his origin story. The crime family New York accents in this movie feel a little forced at times.
Down at the docks!
Hey, yo, Frankie, how you doing, man? How you doing? I'm walking here, you fucking piece of shit.
Paul Budiansky, the detective that's trying to apprehend Castle, asks this other guy at the station which drawer the alleged Punisher murders are located, and the man responds, all of them. The camera then pans around this gigantic room full of shelves holding boxes of files. It's a very effective scene, and something very similar happens in Garth Ennis's Welcome Back Frank comic book run, except this detective is a white guy instead. The big moral dilemma in this movie happens when Frank Castle accidentally kills a federal agent who was working undercover when he killed all these mafia guys. And so he has this ethical quandary over it. I think that Frank Castle from the comics would probably just brush it under the rug as like collateral damage or something.
Collateral damage.
Like, he didn't know that this guy was undercover, but I do think it's an interesting dilemma to give the character because he does often try to do the right thing, like the right thing, which is like save innocence when he can. In the movie, he says to Micro, he was one of the good guys. He had a family. I think it's kind of silly when he says this in the movie because the bad guys have families too, and their wives and kids aren't automatically evil out of association. Like, the Punisher has a very real negative impact on so many innocent lives, and he doesn't really think about that ever. He just thinks, oh, well, the evil guys are dead, so the world's a better place. Micro is played by Wayne Knight in this movie, and I think he plays the role pretty well. Microchip is to Punisher what Alfred is to Batman, if Batman was a maniac and ended up killing Alfred, which Punisher does in the comics, but anyway. In the movie, Frank Castle tries to make amends by visiting the home of the widow and child and dropping off a shit ton of money. He finds the kid there and then the widow, and somehow she recognizes him. More likely, she just correctly assumes it's him, and I do like this scene. Frank Castle clearly doesn't fear death. In fact, he welcomes it.
This is where you do.
He's tortured every day by the haunting memories of his past, and he welcomes death at the hand of this poor widow. This is similar to the scene from the 1989 Punisher when the kid confronts him, but it's done a lot better here in my opinion. Although I should add that the little girl is way too calm during this confrontation. Her mother is holding a gun at a stranger, but this little girl just calmly asks for a different coloring utensil, like nothing's happening.
I need it.
But yeah, this is a much better Punisher movie. The ideas in this movie are fun at times, but the filmmaking is definitely average to bad. But I think it's serviceable for an average action movie. The acting is the worst thing about this movie, in my opinion. It ranges from fine to downright atrocious. It's also pretty goofy.
No, everything is not okay.
The bad guys infiltrate the dead agent's home, and one of them shoots a bunch of baby dolls one by one. Like, damn, dude, you've gotta be pretty deranged to do something like that.
I'm gonna get my applesauce back.
He's gonna get his applesauce back. There's a hilarious moment when Castle is forced to work with a detective in order to save this family. They enter the home together, and the detective starts to arrest one of the mobsters when Castle raises his shotgun and blows the guy's face off in front of him. It made me laugh out loud. He also shoots this guy's face off with a child in his arms. A true psychopath, if I've ever seen one. We stan a very chaotic, neutral king. I'd be lying if I said a part of me doesn't love this movie. Look at the awkward ass lighting in this car scene with Jigsaw. It looks so different from the rest of the movie. It's like, what were they thinking? At the end of the movie, Jigsaw hands over the Russians to the police in return for any info they have on Castle. So they reluctantly give him Micro's information. Micro gives them information to find Castle's hideout. The script is fucking terrible at times. This guy says, "I asked you a question."
Hey, I asked you a question.
Run!
Oh my god. Castle goes to a church in one scene, which was pretty odd to see. So you might be thinking, so Castle is a religious man in the comics or something? Well, surprisingly, yes. While there isn't a ton to go on, Frank Castle was at one point a Catholic seminary student studying to be a priest. He's also shown attending Catholic confession. I haven't seen these myself, that's just what I've read online. It's kind of weird imagining the Punisher as a religious man. Like, dude, you don't just expect to go to hell. Like, you're going all the way down. So yeah, Jigsaw knows he can't kill the Punisher himself, so he rounds up the gangs of New York to come together to kill him. Because, you know, all these gangs hate the Punisher, and they would all love to see him dead. But the way they do this in the movie is so goofy. Jigsaw and his sidekick, Looney Bin Jim, a character that's made up for the movie, by the way, stand in front of a screen with the American flag waving on it, and they speak to each gang in front of this same screen, but in different locations. All they do to convince us of this is change the lighting on their faces to reflect the lighting in the venues that they visit. Are they carrying around a tape that has an American flag waving on it or something, and insisting that they stand in front of the TV in each of these places? It's just dumb. So Jigsaw successfully manages to get all these opposing gangs in one building. So they all start killing each other. Castle infiltrates through a window and starts punishing the criminals. He couldn't ask for anything better. All these guys in one place. Thanks, Jigsaw.
Happy?
This is definitely an action-packed and fun sequence.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
At one point, he shoves a gun through a door and shoots a grenade into the room. At the end of the movie, Castle saves the woman and child. Instead of killing Micro himself in this movie, Micro dies at the hands of Jigsaw. And Castle seems to care for him a lot more in this movie than he does in the comic. At least the Garth Ennis Punisher Max comic. There is a mutual respect in the comic between these two men, but in the source material, Castle is a killing machine on a mission, and he never allows anything to get in the way of that. No friends, no lovers, nothing. "Let me put you out of my misery," Castle says to Jigsaw, impaling him and then throwing him onto a fire like a fucked up looking human kebab. The final scene of the movie shows one of the detectives at gunpoint. The detective realizes that the Punisher is a necessary evil, so he calls out, "Frank." The Punisher is then seen standing in front of a church with an illuminated cross. It says, "Jesus saves," but then the Jesus flickers out as the Punisher shoots the guy, telling us that the Punisher kills the guilty because God does nothing. It's kind of hilarious that the movie justifies this insane action. Who's worse? The man who is so desperate for money that he has to resort to demanding people for their wallets at gunpoint, even with the knowledge that the Punisher is out there somewhere and he might get blown to bits out of nowhere. So that's gotta be a pretty desperate individual. Who knows why he needs the money? Sure, it might be for a drug addiction, but it might be to feed his family. Maybe the weight of capitalism crushed him. Who knows? We don't know this guy's story, but Frank Castle doesn't give a shit, just shoots the guy. It's pretty ridiculous when you start to think about it. And I definitely think this movie romanticizes the Punisher more than it should. Overall, I think this movie is a pretty good portrayal of the character. Okay, let's very briefly talk about the Punisher show. Well, initially, Jon Bernthal's Punisher was introduced in the show Daredevil. In Daredevil, he plays off of Matt Murdock's character very well, you know, because these two men focus on fighting crime in very different ways, and it's interesting to watch them clash and try to convince one another that their perspective is right. I'll be mostly focusing on the Punisher show in this video, but there is one episode from Daredevil I want to highlight, and that's episode 8 of season 2, named Guilty as Sin. In this episode, Castle is on trial for his crimes. He takes the stand and shocks the crowd. He doesn't care that he's arrested. He's a broken man. This episode is pretty ironic since the first solo comic ever written of the Punisher shows him breaking out of prison. The best part of this episode is when Frank takes the stand. After Matt Murdock has finished his questioning and speech, Frank starts to talk. Basically, Matt Murdock is trying to get an insane verdict for Frank. If they decide that he's mentally ill, then, you know, he'll get a softer sentence. But then Frank does something unexpected, or expected, depending on, you know, what you know about the character. He tells everyone that he isn't crazy. He goes completely against what his defense was trying to do for him. He tells the crowd that he would kill everyone that he's killed over again, and that he liked doing it. No, he loved killing them.
Because I liked it, and I loved it!
This is the Frank Castle that I recognize from the comics. He says, "You call me the Punisher, the big bad Punisher. Well, I am the Punisher. I'm right here. You want it, I'll give it to you. I'm guilty. I'll kill every single one of them." It's such a great scene. I love it. But the Punisher show itself tries to tackle the question, how would someone like Frank Castle realistically move on from his trauma? Is it possible for someone like him to live normally after killing so many and experiencing what he's experienced? Can the war inside him realistically be put to rest? The answer is yes and no. Over the course of the show, the writers tell us that Frank's internal war will never end. It can only hibernate. This is the first Punisher adaptation to be filmed in New York City. Jon Bernthal is so perfect for this character. His voice, his face, his demeanor, everything is so perfect for this dark and tortured character. He's definitely the best casting choice for Frank Castle that I've seen to date. He might not look like Frank Castle as much as Ray Stevenson, but Jon Bernthal embodies the character. Interestingly, the show takes place 6 months after he finishes killing off the entire crime family that was responsible for his family's death. Afterward, without much of a mission, he takes his anger out via construction. He's trying to put the war behind him. Everyone out there thinks Frank Castle is dead. He's trying to create this new life for himself. Best he can. It's not really working, but he's trying. We see him reading Moby Dick, which I love. The parallels between his story and Moby Dick are fairly obvious if you've read it. Ahab is obsessed with this single-minded pursuit to catch the white whale, and similarly, Frank Castle is obsessed with his mission to find and kill the men responsible for his family's death. Eventually, this obsession carries over into a full-blown war against evildoers of all sorts, a never-ending war. The inciting incident in season 1 of Punisher that forces Frank back into his war involves the other people that he works with at this construction site, and it's rather ingenious the way that they did it. So Frank has this weird compulsion to continue to work far into the night. He can't sleep, so he just works. He's slamming down these walls non-stop, which results in less work that can be given to the rest of the men. And some of them resent him for this because they want the overtime. He obviously doesn't give a shit about them, so he continues working far into the night. Some of these guys decide to rob a poker game to fill their pockets, and they have one of the younger guys named Donnie go with them. Donnie is the only person out of the bunch that was friendly with Frank, and Frank can tell that he's a good kid, who just got roped in with the wrong crowd. Donnie accidentally drops his wallet when he's gathering the money from the poker table, and the mobsters see it, so they know his name. Kind of a problem. After leaving, the other guys know Donnie is a loose end, so they have to take care of him before the mobsters find him. So these guys go back to the construction site where Frank is still hammering away. He notices them and watches from afar. After these guys toss Donnie into the concrete mixer with the plan to leave him there to die, Frank confronts them and he asks them to turn off the machine. They refuse, which is the biggest mistake they would ever make. Frank Castle's war begins again, starting with these poor fuckers. The music that accompanies him killing these guys is perfect. It has that animalistic, feral, and guttural sound to it. You almost feel bad for these men. They're completely out of their depth fighting Frank, and they're all dealt with in a matter of seconds. Frank asks one of them where they stole the money from, and gets his answer before killing him. And so the Punisher is officially back.
Welcome back, Frank.
What makes this whole scenario so perfect is that Frank was directly responsible for their crime. Because if he just let them work overtime, then maybe they wouldn't have stooped so low to get some extra cash. But Frank Castle doesn't like nuance. He sees these guys doing a bad thing, and he almost instinctively reverts back to who he used to be. Up is down and black is white. He does this without thinking for a second that maybe he was partly responsible for all this. The show tells us that Frank isn't a good guy, and he knows this, which is why he rejected Donnie's friendship in the beginning of the show. Later, Frank finds his way to the mobster's hideout. He cuts the power and guns them all down. Everyone in this room is dead before you could count to 5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And he does this to save Donnie's family. And let's be honest, he has a thing for killing mafiosos. He's good at it. This show is great at showing us just how absurdly effective this guy is at ending lives. So why didn't Frank let Donnie die? He committed a crime after all, right? Well, not really. They robbed the mob, so Frank doesn't really have moral qualms about that. Microchip and Billy Russo are quite different in this show when compared to their comic book counterparts. But I actually really like what they did with Micro in this show. He's much thinner in this show than his comic book counterpart. In the comics, while investigating his nephew's murder, Micro met and started collaborating with the Punisher. In the show, Micro investigates a torture and assassination that gets him in trouble, and he reaches out to Frank in an effort to try and use him, and it backfires on him. The show completely changes Billy Russo's origin, from this random guy in the mafia to someone that Frank served with in the war, and then afterwards became this rich, sociopathic corpo asshole. The show tackles subjects such as the horrors of war, post-war PTSD, war crimes, the role violence plays in upholding and preserving justice, and right versus wrong. There are little callbacks to the source material here and there, like in episode 4 when the back of a truck opens up and Frank is standing there with a flamethrower in hand, blasting flames everywhere. In the comic, this scene is a lot more deadly, but it was still cool to see him do this in the show. It's kind of funny what the show did for the Punisher in the cultural zeitgeist. It completely overshadowed the movies. In fact, on Instagram, when I asked you guys what you thought of the Punisher logo, one of you just responded with John Bernthal. After Daredevil and the Punisher show came out, it was like the movies never existed. The Punisher was always John Bernthal. And I honestly don't have a huge problem with this. I think John Bernthal is a perfect Punisher. So let's talk about how Marvel tried to get rid of Frank Castle and replace him with this guy named Joe Garrison. Brother, So yeah, ultimately, Marvel thought it was time to retire Frank Castle, whether it be because of the political controversies or not. It probably definitely did, but you know, whatever. They wanted to find someone new. So they introduced us to this character named Joe Garrison. Definitely a worse name in my opinion. I love the name Frank Castle for someone like the Punisher because a castle represents a strong foundation. It's just a perfect name for someone like him. Joe Garrison.
Oh, brother.
Oh yeah, Garrison, that's an army word. And Joe Garrison, he was, I don't know, he was part of a garrison. His introductory comic was all like sci-fi and futuristic, and his new suit just looks terrible in my opinion. He's a downgrade in every way. So yeah, Joe Garrison is a random S.H.I.E.L.D. agent who was originally known as the Gravedigger, which is kind of similar to Lin Lei replacing Danny Rand as Iron Fist, although there have been many other Iron Fists. Readers found Joe Garrison's book underwhelming with a boring antagonist that felt like a different version of Jigsaw. Punisher sales plummeted, and the interest in Joe Garrison was non-existent. So Joe Garrison as the Punisher was canceled, and they reintroduced Frank Castle. Good idea. I don't think it's ever a good idea to replace an iconic name in comics unless you've got an incredible new version in mind, which is not easy to do. There are 2 short films called Dirty Laundry and No Mercy. Haven't seen them, but they exist if you want to see them. As far as Frank Castle portrayals on film, rated best to worst, I would say John Bernthal, Ray Stevenson at a close second, and then Tom Jane, and then Dolph Lundgren. Overall, I think all 3 Punisher movies are pretty mid. I think Warzone is by far the most faithful to the comics, but all 3 have fun action sequences. The show, while it doesn't try nearly as hard to match the comics beat for beat, definitely does its own thing pretty well. And like I said before, John Bernthal embodies Frank Castle perfectly. So yeah, I thought the Punisher movies were meh at best, but it is what it is. Let me know what you guys think of the Punisher in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you so much to all my patrons that make videos like this possible. All the uncensored versions of my videos are on Patreon, as well as one monthly exclusive review. Well, it's more of a watch along, but with fun edits, and I'm planning a Q&A to go up on there. So if you're interested in any of that, go over to patreon.com/ElvisTheAlien, and you can join the people that are scrolling up the screen right now. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.